When you just have two fiddles, you can really take out a lot of chord movement and it still sounds beautiful, and there's this kind of groove and flow with it that doesn't sound jerky. Now, you know, Howard and I can obviously play fast and it can be hard driving and stuff, but I really fell in love with this kind of, it was just this soft groove that we were doing with the music, and kind of emphasizing what was beautiful about the tune by, like I said, laying this bed of, you know, beautiful grass underneath it to let it float upon.
Tell me, how did you get into playing Oldtime?
Well, when I was born, I guess I didn't have a choice because everybody in my family played.
Right.
So it wasn't a matter of like, are you going to play? It was a matter of what instrument are you going to pick.
Right.
And I'm not sure why I picked the fiddle. My grandpa was a fiddler, and maybe I thought it was pretty cool that he was a fiddler. I mean, because in my family, you know, that's what people did for fun, is that you sat around and you played tunes with each other. They were farmers and they lived out in the country, and So after working, part of our entertainment was just making music. Back in the 70s, the TV, especially where we lived, it wasn't so prominent anymore, so it really was the form of entertainment there. And I guess at some point around the age of 3, I told my grandma, or maybe my parents might have even chosen to do that. They threw me in a Suzuki class just to get me to where I knew how to pick it up and play a few things like Mary Had a Little Lamb and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And I probably dabbled however a kid dabbles from about the age of 3 to maybe 7. But the other thing that my family did was fiddling contests were really prevalent in the Midwest during the 70s, and my grandpa had gotten into contest fiddling sometime in the 60s and had made a community of friends, and so I started to attending festival-like settings, but it was much different than this. They were primarily fiddle contests, and at some point I must have expressed an interest, or maybe my first contest was in Graham, Missouri. I think it was in 1979, and all I remember is that there were 2 contestants, and so I think maybe my grandma might have said, well, you should enter because they placed 3,
right,
and you're going to get 3rd place, so you got to enter. Well, the thing was is I had to know one more tune in order to compete at this contest. And talk about like the old days, because that was the year that I think Dwight Lamb was a judge. I know Pete McMahon was there. I don't remember if Cyril was there. I wouldn't have known who Cyril was at that age. But that's where everybody gathered to make music. And also a longtime mentor of mine, Amos Chase, was there. Many wonderful fiddlers, woman fiddlers were there. But anyway, they got me to compete in the junior division. But I had to learn this other tune, so I still vividly remember my grandpa taking me behind our camper, which was basically a pickup truck with a camper shell on it. Sure. And the 4 of us rode down there as the days where I guess I could ride in the back of the camper shell, and that was okay. And he taught me one more tune so that I can compete. And I don't remember anything really about competing, but I remember I did get 3rd place. And back in 1979, 3rd place in the junior division got you $35 silver dollars. Susan B. Anthony silver dollars in this nice little bag with a trophy and a plaque. And from that moment on, I kind of liked this contest fiddling thing. I mean, I was like, I guess I would have been 8 years old, and here I was with 35 silver dollars. So I was a fiddler from that day on, and that's when I really started to study with my grandpa. And probably the unique thing about that is that my family's been on the same acreage of land since 1850 when they left LaRue County, Kentucky, and they settled in an area called Big Springs. They're in Douglas County in Kansas, and my grandpa inherited, he was the baby of the family, and so he inherited hundreds of acres that were in this little location. And then when my dad got married and had a family of his own, my grandpa gave each of the kids 5-acre tract on the side of the land. So when I was growing up, I literally could ride my pony through the pasture to my grandparents' house and basically saw them every day.
Right.
So learning tunes from my grandpa consisted of riding my pony through the pasture on the weekend, having my grandma, have cookies or snacks for me when I showed up, because after I'd had this adventure through there, and then sitting outside on one of my grandpa's old pickup trucks learning my next fiddle tune that I wanted to use as a competition piece.
Right.
That was really the reason why I learned tunes, was all for the next contest, because that was our summer adventure, was trying to place at a contest, which in some ways, like looking back on it, like I'm thankful that I learned all of these tunes, but I don't like contest fiddling at all.
Right.
I don't know, but that's how I learned all of the tunes. And so from about the age of probably 8 or 9, my time was spent just learning all of the great tunes that my grandpa had amassed over the years of his fiddling.
Curious about, I'm just fascinated by seconding generally. Was that something that you guys did at home?
You know, my grandpa did seconding, and that's kind of interesting for me to think about, because as I told you, I didn't understand anything about keys and about I did know these cheats, and now I'm working on a book now of describing my grandma's cheats, because my grandma was brilliant. She was a mandolin player, and so when I had said I wanted to fiddle, she was actually the one that taught me the first 2 tunes to get me to go to the contest, and she did that by teaching herself how to play fiddle and then showing me how to play the tunes. And because she played mandolin, the fingering's similar, so she just had to learn how to bow. But there were these cheats that she had showed me, but I didn't have a way to apply them. But it was the same thing that my grandpa would have used to back up any tune or fiddle tune, because he and I would double fiddle, and he would actually double fiddle with the seconding. And seconding was a common thing in the Midwest. Bob Walters and his family, they had seconding, which is different than twinning. It wasn't like, the twin fiddling. And over here in the last couple years, I now understand the differences. To me, for a while, I just thought they were the same. But seconding was really kind of a chordal sense, which I did not use as a young kid, because I didn't know what it was. But my grandpa used it a lot.
So explain the difference.
Seconding is using the fiddle as a rhythm instrument. You're basically lying the kind of like a cushion for the melody, whereas twinning, you're sharing the melody just kind of at a different interval. So you're still a melody maker, but when you're seconding, you're actually, I think of myself as another rhythm instrument that kind of comes in and out of some twinning, but not a lot.
Right.
And I like it very much. Like, seconding is pretty much a passion of mine. Not that I don't like learning tunes on the fly or chasing tunes, but I love providing that under it. Like I said, I think of it as this little bed of grass for the melody to pop along. And I also think that seconding, I actually think every fiddler, if they're wanting to be a fiddler, they should learn to second first.
Okay.
Because seconding sets you up for all of the groundwork to find a tune. And that's really what I spend a lot of my time teaching now, which has also started this book of getting people to kind of understand that groundwork, because once you understand that, the tunes are just right there. You can't help but play them. You know the chords, and you can move in and out of chords, and moving in and out of chords is hardly no different than playing a tune.
Right.
It's no, because you're using passing notes to get from one to the other, which is the same thing you do for a tune.
Right.
And once you can master that on different sections of the strings, it becomes very obvious how a tune moves,
right,
and you can find it pretty easily.
Right.
So there was a group of very dear friends of mine. It was the Ohio group that always kind of camps at Battleground. And so in 2008, I met them a group of them, and hung out with them the whole time I was at Battleground. And I mean, those folks between all of them, there are so many tunes they know. I mean, literally, I think probably as many of them you could possibly play in a festival. I never understood like how people could stay in a key for 10 hours. Like I camped next to a friend of mine who literally never got out of the key of G for a whole day and knew tune after tune. So anyway, after realizing that this is what people did for fun and realizing that I love this and I love these people that I was hanging out with, it started this study of, well, there's no way, I've never heard these tunes before. I don't even understand roughly about what the sound is exactly. How can I still be a part of this group and kind of what I say, do no harm?
Yeah.
So that's what led into knowing, well, I know chord shapes. I can sit back here and I kind of know which section of the instrument that they're in. I can follow the guitar player. I can start kind of seeing how this works. Little by doing that, the tunes, because I had learned by ear anyway, I was realizing that I could kind of get a percentage of the tune. And not only did I get a percentage of the tune, but I started memorizing how passages worked and just kind of knowing the tune. Like, for example, if you're sitting in the key of G for 6 hours, by the first hour you may not know what you're doing, but after you've played in G for 6 hours, you start noticing that, well, a lot of the tunes are very similar. They're hardly different. They're just different in a little way, but the finger movement and the way you move in and out of the chord shapes, it starts to become very apparent how similar they are.
Right.
That at some point, because I was so obsessed, I would have this tune list when I'd go home, and because I also lived in Kansas and there wasn't really anybody to play with, and I will mention I had a baby in the backpack at the time.
Okay.
So this baby was very small, which meant when I was at home I could put her in the backpack. I was staying at home with her for her first couple years of life. I literally learned tune after tune after tune, and probably by the first year that I got into Oldtime, I could roughly lead about 200 tunes of my own, just by sitting at home and studying. When I started that work, that's when the seconding really started to make sense to me, because once you start, say like if you pick a key, once again G, and you maybe learn 10 tunes in the key of G, and you also understand chord shapes, that's when the tunes start to come out very quickly. And if you're kind of good at memorizing, which I don't know that I'm great at memorizing, but it didn't take long for me to have the melodies in my head, that became really easy. Once I knew some tunes, and then I went back to the whole festival season a year later, not only could I play the tunes, but then I realized I can hear a melody line really easily. And I had a wonderful, I think of her as my tune sister, who, when we would sit in a session together, both kind of liked to hear a little bit of harmony now and then. And it became so much fun to play with her that it was easy to move in and out of harmony as well as play the melody. So once I kind of had that underneath me, now you couldn't do that in every session.
Right.
Some people don't like to hear anything than the straight ahead melody. Right. Well, you just find your people that do like it, and then you hone in on that skill. So I knew how to second, never really called it seconding then, but by that time I knew how to do it, and I started to apply it in our band. I started to apply it even in my own melody tunes, because seconding is really just a variation of the melody, a more simplified variation, but you can move in and out of it. I got into dance fiddling, like for contra dances and square dances, and I loved to practice keeping the melody in my head and moving around the chord shapes while somebody else was maybe kind of remotely holding down the melody. And so it became real easy for me to kind of see the shapes and move in and out of them. But it became more apparent when I met Howard. And when I met Howard, the first time we sat down together, we met at a festival in Kennard, Texas. He had been in the Oldtime community for years. I had been in the Oldtime community for years, and for some reason we had never crossed paths. Except one year here we walked past each other at the hill, looked at each other and moved on, but I didn't know who he was. But I remember the moment, and it wasn't but 2 months later that I met him in person. So anyway, here we are sitting at a jam. He's telling me about all of the tunes that he loves, and I'm telling him about all of the tunes I love and what I've been studying. And he's like, well, we should play some tunes together. And I was like, okay. So anyway, Howard's tunes were so different. I mean, you know, here I'd already been studying tunes from, you know, all of these great fiddlers, Doc Roberts, Tommy Gerald tunes, Fred Cochran tunes. You know, I had a body of tunes, but Howard's tunes were all just weird. You know, I can't even, you know. And so he would pick a tune. He's like, oh no, I can't play that one. It's too weird, you know. Well, what happened was obviously we liked each other. I knew after that festival I had met my best fiddle friend ever, and we started talking online, and that kind of led us having a weekend. He invited me down for a dance, and after that weekend we knew that we were going to try to make something work. When I heard this body of tunes, I was like, you got to get these out there. People are going to want to play these tunes that you've collected and you've been studying. He'd been studying these same tunes for about the past 15 years. And I was like, you got to share this. And that started the Green CD. Well, here were these tunes that I didn't know well, but I really enjoyed playing with him. But I didn't want to do harm, and when, you know, it was just the two of us, there wasn't another guitar player that we could easily rope in to play with us. Well, then there was a way to try to find two fiddles to make music with each other that didn't just sound like the melody being spewed out at you.
Right.
And so that's when I realized, well, this is where seconding my chordal work can work well. I don't really know the tune perfectly yet, but I play enough guitar that I know chord sense, and he could say, well, I think this is just a 1-4-5. Once that happened, that just really opened the world of all of the things that I could do seconding. It wasn't just about chord work or passing notes, but then it became about rhythm. What you can do underneath the tune to enhance the melody, bring it up, bring it down. I've always loved dynamics and fiddling. I used that with dance fiddling. So it was like all of those skills that I loved about fiddling, I could now incorporate hour after hour with somebody. I'd never met somebody else who was obsessed with fiddling as much as I was. And the cool thing was, he was only obsessed with playing the melody.
Right.
So there was no sharing of the seconding. He'd just be like, I love what you do. I'm just going to play the melody until I'm tired of it. You can do what you want to. So it was just like this blank slate on every tune we played. And you know, over the years, I've ended up learning most of his repertoire. But when we first met, we're talking like 500 tunes he knew. And I guess I didn't tell you, but we had asked to do a rhythm and rep. And here I was needing to know the rest of his tunes in a matter of months. I wasn't going to be able to learn note for note every tune he knew.
Right, yeah.
And so once we started doing the double fiddling, we kind of realized there was something special about it. It wasn't just two fiddlers that could play a tune, but it was also two fiddlers that could recognize dynamics and kind of pulsing when the pulsing was happening, and kind of this swell with the music that we could do naturally with each other.
Right.
And that was another route that, like I said, it's one of my favorite things to do, of how to blend two instruments together to where they really just sound like one.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing to do. You know, there's a lot of things that you're thinking about. Is, you know, are you doing the same kind of feel that the other fiddler is? Is your volume underneath? Are you over the top? Are you intonating when they're intonating? Because, you know, sometimes we all use microtones when we,
Sure.
you know, it's just part of our fiddling. And boy, once that happened, I mean, my favorite thing to do is just two fiddles.